Hello, and welcome back to Two Paeds in a Pod. If you've been with us before, thank you so much for sticking around. If you're new, brilliant timing, because we're relaunching with a format I'm genuinely excited about. The previous podcast format was very much interview-based, and honestly, it was great. But getting the right people in the same place at the same time consistently every fortnight, it just wasn't sustainable. And consistency matters more than perfection when it comes to a podcast. So, here's what we're going to do instead. Every 2 weeks, I'm going to sit down, go through the recent paediatric literature, and pull out the things that actually matter. The papers worth reading, the findings worth knowing about, the evidence that might just change how you think about the child in front of you. All of it with a paediatric emergency lens, because that's where I live and work. Each episode will be about 20 minutes long, 2 main stories looked at properly, and a quick roundup of 3 other things that have caught my eye that fortnight. That's it. Straightforward, reliable, and, I hope, genuinely useful, whether you're a trainee just finding your feet or a consultant who's been at this for decades. It's great to be back. Let's get into it. Welcome to Two Paeds in a Pod, the paediatric medical education podcast about thinking clearly when it comes to child health. Each week, we take a paper, a clinical dilemma, or a tricky topic and work through what it actually means for your practice. So, whether you're in emergency care, general paediatrics, or you see children as part of a wider healthcare role, this is a place to step back, challenge assumptions, and sharpen your thinking. Welcome to the show. A 14-year-old boy is brought into your emergency department by ambulance. He's been stabbed and his obs are deteriorating. You've got seconds to make decisions. That scenario plays out somewhere in England more often than any of us would like to admit. This fortnight, a paper landed in the Emergency Medicine Journal that looked at every child under 18 who died of a knife wound in England over a 5-year period. And what it found should stop all of us in our tracks, not just as clinicians, but as people who look after children. Welcome to Two Paeds in a Pod. I'm Ian Lewins, and this is your fortnightly literature sweep. Today, we're going deep on paediatric knife crime mortality. We're looking at new data on the febrile infant, specifically those tricky 29 to 60-day-olds that keep us up all night. And in What's Caught My Eye, we've got a paper about point-of-care ultrasound for pneumonia, and one that might change how you talk to families about palliative care. Let's get into it. So, knife crime in children. Published this month in the Emergency Medicine Journal, a team from Bristol used the National Child Mortality Database to look at every child under 18 who's died of a knife wound in England between April 2019 and March 2024. 145 children over 5 years. That's roughly 1 child every 2 weeks. The average age was 14. 9 in 10 were male. And when you look at who was dying, the inequalities are stark and are really quite uncomfortable. Children of black or black British ethnicity were dying at a rate more than 13 times higher than white children when you correct for population size. And children living in the most deprived areas of England had over 7 times the risk of dying compared with children in the least deprived areas. Those numbers are worth sitting with for a moment. This isn't random. This is patterned. It tracks poverty. It tracks race. It tracks deprivation. Now, from a clinical perspective, and I think this is where it gets really important for those of us working in emergency and urgent care, 60% of those children died before they reached hospital. They never came through our doors. And of the ones who did make it to hospital, over half underwent a thoracotomy, Now, that is not a procedure that happens often in paediatrics. The fact that it was performed in more than half of those who reached hospital tells you something about the severity of the injuries we're talking about. Chest and neck injuries accounted for almost 3/4 of the fatal wounds. But here's the bit I keep coming back to. 75% of these children had been known to social services before they died. More than half had been exposed to domestic violence and abuse, and half had documented neurodiversity or mental health concerns. These are not invisible children. They were known children, known to services, known to the system, and the system didn't prevent this. Now, and I want to be careful here, because this study isn't claiming that better social care would have prevented every one of these deaths. Knife crime is clearly complex and multifactorial, but what it does tell us is that when children come through our emergency departments for any reason, many of them carry a burden of adverse childhood experiences, and we have a role to play. Not just in treating the immediate injury, but in asking the harder questions, in looking beyond the presenting complaint. This paper also raises important questions about what pre-hospital care actually means in this context. If 60% are dying before they reach us, the clinical intervention happens either in the community by bystanders, by paramedics, or not at all. There's a growing conversation in emergency medicine about stop the bleed training in schools, about first aid education, and whether we can shift some of that outcome curve in the field. This paper doesn't answer that, but it makes the question harder to ignore. From a paediatric training perspective, penetrating trauma is something that most of us see rarely, which means that when it does happen, it feels unfamiliar and high pressure. The management of a child with a stab injury is not the same as an adult. The physiology is different. The anatomy is different. Paediatric chest injuries, in particular, carry a different probability distribution of underlying damage than you'd expect in adults. This paper is a reminder that this isn't purely an urban tertiary centre problem either. Knife injuries are distributed across all regions of England, including areas that you might not associate with serious youth violence. My take? This is a paper every paediatrician should read, not just for the clinical content, but because it forces an honest conversation about the children we're looking after and what we owe them. The paper is in the Emergency Medicine Journal, published April 2026, Roberts et al., and the DOI is in the show notes. Now, staying with the theme of high-stakes decisions in the ED, let me turn to the febrile infant, because a paper landed in JAMA Paediatrics this month that's directly relevant to anyone who's ever stood at the end of a cot at 2 a.m, wondering whether to do a lumbar puncture or not. We're talking about infants, aged 29 to 60 days, that horrible no man's land. Old enough not to automatically go into the do everything under 28-day pathway, but young enough that you genuinely cannot rule out serious bacterial infection on clinical grounds alone. This paper, from Burstein, G, Cooperman and colleagues, and if that last name rings a bell, it should, because Cooperman's group have been the major force behind PCAN febrile infant research for the last decade. This is a validation study of the updated PCAN rule. The rule uses a combination of clinical and laboratory parameters: temperature, urinalysis, absolute neutrophil count, procalcitonin, and CSF findings to stratify infants into low, intermediate, and higher risk for invasive bacterial infection, which means bacteremia and bacterial meningitis. What makes this paper timely is that it's testing how the rule performs in an international sample. Mostly the original derivation and internal validation was done in North American centres, and the question's always been, does it hold up elsewhere? Does it hold up in different healthcare systems with different bacterial epidemiology, different rates of prior antibiotic exposure? Now, I should be upfront, this paper is behind a paywall and the full data aren't in the abstract, so I'd encourage you to get hold of the full text. But what the abstract confirms is that this is a diagnostic study examining rule performance in an international cohort, and that framing alone tells you the field is moving in the direction of broader validation. The clinical question it speaks to is one we deal with every day. In the UK, we don't have a single unified pathway for the 29 to 60-day-old febrile infant in the way that PCAN has tried to establish. NICE guidance is somewhat more conservative. We tend to do a full septic screen. The question of whether we could safely identify a genuinely low-risk group and avoid lumbar puncture or even avoid admission is one that has real implications for families and for resource use. What I'd want listeners to take from this is know that PCAN exists, know its components, fever, urinalysis, absolute neutrophil count, procalcitonin and CSF, and know that the evidence base for it is maturing internationally. If you're not using a structured risk stratification approach for this age group, now is the time to revisit your departmental pathway. I'll link the paper Burstein et al., JAMA Paediatrics, April 2026, DOI in the show notes. So, what's caught my eye this fortnight? Right, there are 3 quick ones from this fortnight sweep. First up, point of care lung ultrasound for paediatric pneumonia. A review paper in the Paediatric Emergency Care Journal this month pulls together the evidence for using bedside lung ultrasound instead of, or alongside, chest x-ray when you're working up a child with suspected pneumonia. The headline numbers are impressive. Sensitivity up to 94%, specificity up to 96%. That's at least as good as a chest x-ray, often better. And of course it comes without the radiation, the wait, the logistics of getting a chest film done. It's quicker, it's bedside, and in the hands of a trained clinician, it gives you real-time information. The honest caveat, and the paper doesn't shy away from this, is that distinguishing bacterial from viral pneumonia on ultrasound is hard. Viral bronchiolitis, asthma, and bacterial consolidation can produce overlapping patterns. You need good training, and you need to interpret findings in clinical context. But if you're working in a paediatric ED or acute setting, and you're not yet using lung ultrasound with any confidence, this is a good prompt to get some training. The evidence is mature, the technology is there. The question is whether our skills are keeping pace with it. The paper is Marzouk, Paediatric Emergency Care, April 2026. DOI in the show notes. Second, and this one's a bit different, a paper in BMJ Paediatrics Open on paediatric palliative care referral, specifically about the language we use when we introduce it. The premise is something we probably all recognise intuitively. When you say the words palliative care to a family, they often hear giving up. They hear dying. And that framing, conscious or not, delays referral. It delays families accessing support that could genuinely improve their child's quality of life, sometimes for months or years. This paper brings in communication science and cognitive psychology to look at how we can reframe those questions. One of the things it highlights is that directly debunking myths, saying palliative care isn't just about end of life, can actually backfire because you're still activating the association. The brain hears end of life. What works better is replacing the narrative altogether, leading with what palliative care actually is: the coordinated support, the symptom management, the family relationships, the ordinary moments that become possible. There's a nice metaphor in the paper. Palliative care is the umbrella, not the rain. You reach it before the storm, not when you're already soaked. It's not a clinical trial, it's not going to change your protocols, but it might change how you introduce the conversation next time. And for all of us, I think that's genuinely useful. The paper is Stewart et al., BMJ Paediatrics Open, April 2026, and again, DOI in the show notes. And finally, just a flag rather than a deep dive, the new Surviving Sepsis Campaign paediatric guidelines for 2026 are out in paediatric critical care medicine. 68 international experts, 61 statements, and honestly, one of the most important takeaways is that only 3 of those recommendations are based on high or moderate quality evidence, 3 out of 61. That's not a failure of the guidelines, that's an honest reflection of where the evidence base actually is in paediatric sepsis. And I think it's worth sitting with because it has real implications for how we make decisions at the bedside and how we counsel families about uncertainty. We're going to do a full episode on this. There's too much to cover in 90 seconds. But get the paper on your radar now. Weiss, Peters et al., Paediatric Critical Care Medicine, March 2026. DOI in the show notes. So, that's it for this fortnight. Welcome back, and here are 3 things I'd take away from today. Number 1, read the knife crime paper. It's important, and it's ours to act on. 2, if you look after febrile infants, get familiar with the PCAN framework. The evidence is maturing, and it will shape practice. And 3, next time you're about to say, palliative care isn't just about dying to a family, try not to. Replace the narrative instead of fighting it. All references and DOIs are in the show notes, along with links to the papers we've covered today. If you've got thoughts on any of these, or a topic you'd like us to cover, you can get in touch through the usual channels. And if this episode was useful, please share it. The more people in the paediatric community engaging with this kind of evidence, the better we all get. I'll see you in a fortnight. Thanks for spending your time with us on 2 Paeds in a Pod. If this episode sharpened your thinking, make sure you're following or subscribed wherever you listen. Share it with your team, use it in your next teaching session, and let's keep the conversation going. If you value this kind of learning, please leave a rating or review. It genuinely helps more clinicians find the show. We'll see you next time.